Thank you, John, for your kind words. Yeah, I can't explain any of it either, and I'm sure most of you would have the same situation. Supposed to move? Okay. Oh, okay. Yes, I guess that's me. This is a little difficult for me. I didn't realize that the Zoom was going to restrict where we are. I'm used to walking around and talking with my hands. Um, so you can't talk about anything without talking about AI. I'm at Parsons. These are my personal thoughts. We're about 5,000 people, 5 billion in business. We probably manage the biggest construction projects in the world. You probably heard of our competitors, WSP, Bechtel, Jacobs. We're sort of in the same league. I myself am not in the construction space. I came from law, entrepreneur, and technology. I was brought to Parsons because I understood cities, I understood utilities, I had done global work in technology and fundraising, closing deals, but also I understood how to use what's called a digital twin, which is the digital representation of a physical object. I understood simulation. I understood how to use AI. And so I work with 20,000 engineers, and I'm not an engineer. So for me, it's constantly a battle of learning how to explain technology and its application. And because the problem, there's a Zen quote that I always use, which is, in the expert's mind, there is one solution. In the beginner's mind, there is many. And so if we're blessed, we're a beginner. We're always a beginner. We're starting over. We're always learning. And I think that's something that I want to bring today, as I really wanted to use John's music theme as my riff. But I think the thing that we need to do is we have to have beginner's mind. We have to start over, because I don't think we're succeeding. And I think we have to significantly change the way we operate and how we apply and inform and then provision funds. What I learned in the construction space is it's still very antiquated. They don't digitize, they use paper. And this is also true in the B2B and the B2G space with finance. Now in B2C, we're totally digitized, right? We're all banked. But when you come to government and you come to cities and you come to other businesses, especially if you move outside of the Western world, they're not digitized. And so there's real issues there around using technology. So anyway, whenever I want to get something approved, I just call it an AI project, right? That's where I am right now. We're a public company and we're all about AI. I talked to John and he said, let's have some context. And it's going to be funny, the context that I chose. And then I do want to talk about the secret about the power of capital. It's not the money. There are other aspects of capital that we need to focus on, and something that I'm particularly interested in. And then I have my own little pet peeve around the tension between sustainability and resilience. And I called my title, just because I was in a mood that day: sustainable is not resilient, is not smart, is not digital twins, is not AI, because these are all buzzwords that you've probably heard for the last 10 or 20 years. And of course, and they're just overused. And I sit in the room with people who argue about what digital twins is, or what AI is, or what smart is, or sustainable. And it's such a losing conversation. But you'll find we have tons of standards organizations, we have tons of NGOs around the world who will spend all their time talking. And I literally mean, I am not interested in advancing the discussion anymore. So I hope you're in the same ballpark. So I'm going to show you 4 slides now about the barriers that local government have about financing. The slides so much aren't important, except for this: I did them 4 years ago. Nothing's changed. Okay? And so when John asked me to speak, and I was going through all my different stuff, and I reached back into some other stuff I had done, I realized that each of these slides were pertinent. So local government financing is broken. One of the things that I worked on forever and still work on is most cities go to procurement only knowing about 1/3 of the solutions. And that's in the United States. So you can imagine what it's like in India or Africa. And Africa has 40 cities that are over 1 million people. In North America, we only have 7. In Europe, they have 11. So that tells you what's happening. But they only go to procurement with 30%. So a lot of times, then if you have corruption or if you have other types of issues, they're not getting the right solution for their problems. So you really have to pay attention to the fact that you can have all the information in the world and all the knowledge, but getting it to the right people at the right time is really critical. Now, there's a ton of private money out there. This number from Preqin is actually 4 years old. And believe it or not, in the last 4 years, it's doubled. There's actually about $500 billion waiting out there to find what I'm going to call, and every one of you have heard this word, bankable projects. Okay? So it can be a nonprofit, it can be a city, it can be a commercial venture, and trying to make the project bankable is usually takes anywhere up to 5% of the total tranche or the total amount provided. And I've worked with the World Bank, I've worked with the Asian Development Bank, and every time they talk about the fact that they have to bring the recipient along. We're all familiar, many of you probably far more familiar than I am with the muni market and global impact bonds, the grants in US federal. This was 4 years ago we had $1 trillion. I think that now it's about $3 trillion. So the money keeps increasing, but it's not getting to the right places at the right time. Now, another aspect of this is understanding how construction and infrastructure funding works. If you deal with any like KPMG or PwC or Deloitte or any of these organizations that try to help on infrastructure projecting, they'll tell you that they don't even look at a project if it's under 200 million. They're going to look at projects above 400 million. And why are they doing that? Because they need to get the time they spend back. And that's usually going to be 4 to 5% of the total. So generally, most of the projects that are funded by traditional infrastructure financiers are in the $500 million range. Every project I deal with at Parsons, I think the minimum number is $1 billion now that I think about it, okay? A lot of them are in the Middle East, unbelievable projects. I just got back from Riyadh 10 days ago, and the projects are unbelievable, but that's not the rest of the world. That's like 10% of the landmass. So only 16% of the cities in the world can self-fund, and there's a huge amount of darkness. In architecture, engineering, and construction, what's called AEC, that's where Parsons is, we have a word for what we call the dark matter, which is there's a ton of information out there that we can't access. And this is about how do you build a building? How do you build a road? How do you design it? How do you take it on? How do you put operating systems in? But you can take that metaphor and apply it completely to finance. It's opaque. I talked to John that we were just sharing experiences early today when we first met, and he talked about his early banking career, and it was all about relationships. And most of you in this room, I think you totally build, I know as a lawyer, you build your practice on relationships. As good as that is, and I'm a relationship builder, that won't work going forward. We have to change the way we do business. And that really applies with finance. So again, many of you have heard this. Again, this is 4 years old. Actually, this quote is later than 4 years old, but we need to find bankable projects. Now that can just as easily be a nonprofit, $1 million for a homeless shelter. We have to find a way. I was talking to Mike earlier about making that kind of project bankable just as easily as we could be talking about a $100 million project somewhere. Now, I'm going to pick out, this particularly concerns me because I think this is all about information and data. Can anybody, this is from the UN Climate Change portal that exists today. Can anybody tell me the problem with this page? If you can see it. Look at the very bottom. The last date that this page was updated was 24 March 2020. That tells you the problem. And that is the problem we have with impact investing and any kind of investing. Now, the UN is totally in the right place, right? I don't think anybody here is going to argue that they're not trying to make a difference and do the right thing. My argument, always been my argument, is they don't know what they're doing, okay? And they'll have I mean, if you look at all the stuff for COP28, it's dialogue, 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 dialogue. And I'm going like, no, that's not what we need, right? But I think that's the place where finance and impact investing can make the change. So the power of capital is access to information. It's not the money itself. How many of you are familiar with the story of the Rothschilds in the Battle of Waterloo? Okay, it's a cool story. Yep. So the Rothschilds had a courier network. They found out about Napoleon losing at Waterloo before anybody else did, and they invested in the gilt market in London, and they made a killing, okay? So that's the problem we have today, is that finance doesn't have the information that they need about bankable projects so as to accelerate the delivery of funds. That's one side of the equation. The other side of the equation is that those receiving the funds don't know how to deliver up the information or what kind of information an impact investor needs so as to accelerate. And this is an area that I know very well. It's all about information exchange. All of you are familiar. I mean, that's exactly what Facebook is. Facebook is information exchange. That's all it is. Google today, with its use of graph databases and the ability to answer a question, it's just about serving up information as quickly as possible to you in a way that you can use it. So in the consumer space, both with finance and information exchange, we've solved this problem to a great extent. Now, there's huge issues around systematic racism and poverty and unbankable, but to the extent that we can get digital banking out, for any of you who know the story of M-Pesa in Kenya, you know, it's how Kenyans started becoming bankable. How did they do it? They did it through their mobile phone, okay? 75% of people in Africa now have a mobile phone. 10 years ago, it was like 10%. So they use that for bankable. So a lot of what we're doing in the consumer world, it's a question of extending it into the impact investing world. So I want to do a shout out to Lou Selly from Thought Labs. Lou, raise your hand. A lot of the research that I use, I rely upon Thought Lab for. I've worked with Lou for about 5 years. And they do a survey of about 250 cities around the world, and they're able to identify early movers, thought leaders, things like that. It's really, really valuable, and I suggest you talk to Lou. So what Lou will tell you is that a lot of cities, especially the early movers, are investing in environment and sustainability. It's a big issue. Now, I am a big believer in systems and infinity loops. In other words, things keep coming back and biting themselves in the tail, right? That's the way to say it. That's not so nice. So we start out with human activity. We have climate change, which is caused by high emissions. With sustainability, we respond by changing our fossil fuel use, and then we reduce it, and the loop goes back, and it's sort of if I may use the expression with somebody I talked to earlier, it's a regenerative loop where things are getting better over time. But I want to point out an issue, and this is really becoming an issue in the United States. Resilience doesn't work this way, okay? So if you get up to the right corner where you had sustainability, where wise use, we're trying to make things better, our response with resilience is to protect. The definition of 100 resilient cities, you guys are all probably familiar with the Rockefeller Foundations. They spent $90 million and then shut down. But they came up with a definition. I think this proves the very first thing I said, which was, yeah, people can come up with definitions. Resilience is about surviving and thriving with shock and stress. So today in Florida, nobody will talk about climate change, but their budget for resilience is $2 billion. And you can understand why, right? Water rising, hurricanes. So whenever I'm talking, I spent a lot of time advising Fortune 50 companies that were trying to sell their technology. And I'd say, okay, when you're in Europe, you can use sustainability. When you're in Australia, definitely use sustainability, though they have the highest carbon emissions per GDP of any country in the world. They want to change that. But when you come to the United States, don't talk about sustainability. There are only 4 cities in the United States that have graded themselves against the UN SDGs, Orlando and Seattle being two of them. It's just not something American cities are interested in. I sat in a SAS Institute Platinum LEED building in Cary, North Carolina, with 80 people from Wake County, Raleigh, Cary, the North Carolina Department of Transportation. They had a $6 billion traffic budget. And I was trying to show them how with technology, they could spend 600 million and get a better outcome than the 6 billion. But I made a real fatal mistake at the beginning of my talk. I said, how many people in the room? They have the highest, they drive more miles per any county in the country per GDP. And if you know Wake County, it's spread out, it's very wealthy, 3 universities, it's, and they drive more miles, they commute longer than anybody else. And I said, how many, I know you want traffic efficiency. I said, how many of you would like to reduce carbon? Not one person raised their hand. And this was 18 months ago. So this is the United States. This is the issue that you have to deal with. And if you're talking about impact investing and you're trying to sell it, you want to talk about resilience, okay? So then the question is how do you make a community resilient while you make it sustainable? Now, I fully believe that the $2 billion they're going to spend in Florida will go towards making it sustainable in some way. But you can think of the outcomes, and I'm going to bring this really to a fine point, the area where I live every day. But resilience and sustainability, they're all just thrown together. Everybody thinks this is cool stuff, yeah, let's talk about it. But they're very different in terms of their outcomes. And if I'm programming software, if I'm collecting data, if I'm doing benchmarking and KPIs, and I'm going to make the point now, if I'm going towards AI, it's very different. So this was I think this is a beautiful graph. It was done 10 years ago, right? I found it on the web. It's the ideal community. How do you bring together livability, sustainability, resilience? I'm a big believer in livability, this whole concept of how do we make places progressively better to live in. But the real key on this word is ideal. It's not the reality of the situation, okay? There is tension between livability, resilience, and sustainability.
What?
So where I'm working now is with AI, okay? And I'm working on these big projects where any of you that are familiar with IoT, Internet of Things networks, the real goal is how far do you extend your knowledge gathering, your data gathering, and your control. So I was just working on a big Space Force project. They have 11 systems. They want to go from
I know that one, yeah.
3 launches a year to 300.
This is in the Schwab account. No,
how do you take the math on all of that to make it work? Because it's all math. That's what it is. It's not humans aren't going to be involved with this eventually. It's totally how you do the math. So what I came up with was this so everybody talks about data at the edge, action at the edge. It's what do you do at the edge? Now, the edge for all of you is your mobile phone, okay? That's exactly what the edge is for you in the consumer world. But in the military world, it can be a missile that you're firing. It can be a rifle. It can be the soldier who is, any of you have seen the pictures of Ukrainian soldiers. They are wired, right? Not just for sound, but other things too. But then think about it in the space that we live in, critical infrastructure, hurricanes, tornadoes, things that happen all at the speed of a bullet or the speed of a tornado. So when you talk about AI at the edge, you're talking about how do I operate at the edge? How do I save lives? How do I protect people? And this is where resilience and sustainability comes in. So I'm in this place right now where I'm trying to find the data that would teach an algorithm how to make the right decision at the edge of a tornado, right? So does it give an alert system? Does it warn? Does it maybe throw up a concrete wall? What does it do, right? Or a flood. I mean, I worked with Nashville on flooding, and it was all about how could you get people information quick enough at the edge so that they would avoid that intersection or they would leave those houses. And the big problem, any of you are familiar with the CDC vulnerability index, there are like 5 categories of people who are vulnerable, right? And the question really is how could we get the information to them? They didn't speak English. They were disabled. They were young. They were old. How could we get information to them so that they could act? So the problem we have today is that we can't make decisions as human beings, and yet somehow we're going to ask AI to do it for us. And so with that, I'm going to leave you with that question, because I think that's really not only the dilemma of our own inability to decide and act, but the fact that we're actually going to be asked to do it quicker, and we're going to have tools that do it quicker, and yet we'll have no control over them. And it's not, I mean, we want these tools to be there, but enough said. AI at the edge of disaster. Hopefully you guys will get it before I do, but that's where I am right now. Thank you.